Hello, Zoom people. I don't know, can you hear me now while we wait for the camera? Oh, there we go. Okay, and I'll record this live too. For anyone who misses Thursday. So online, you guys are way too old to remember Romper Room. I see Leah, and I see Taylor, and I see Mason, Garrett, Taylor, Gloria, Isabel, Quinn today, and Antonio, Logan, Corey, all right, wow, 6 of us, huh? Let me know if any of those guys show up. All right, how's everyone doing today?
Good.
Online people? Let me hear your voices. Just, there we go. Just it makes it real, right? Emotional connection. Well, that's an interesting word to think about as we do these readings. This idea of connection keeps coming up. And, you know, just part of our human experience is to understand the world around us. And, you know, having you guys in this little tube in the ceiling, you know, I got to remember there's actually 4 real people there, and just hearing your voice for a second. Corey, I'm going to mark you in here now that you've signed in. Hang on just a second. You know, helps me feel connected, helps me get past the block I had of, are they really here? Can they hear us? You know, I need to feel that connection. So the word connection keeps coming up in the book. And I think it's a good concept overall as filmmakers to think about what we're doing. In a lot of ways, what we're doing is trying to connect with an audience, right? So he talks a lot about shots that create an emotional connection. And those are ones that we went over. Those are ones that we went over last Tuesday. The extreme close-up, the medium close-up. I want you guys to think of those as your emotional shots, or where you build an emotional connection with your audience, okay? Very simple concepts here, but going to be really powerful when you actually use them. Especially because your audience doesn't know what we know about the purpose of framing shots and why you're using a close-up when you're using it. They just know they feel something. You know, they make that connection. So it's kind of cool. It may seem simple when we think, well, yeah, you know, close up, I'm going to be more connected to the person. But when you guys start using it to communicate, you have this power, this language, this visual language that we're studying and using to manipulate people, to help them feel something, carry them along, right? It's kind of a secret code. So the CUs, that family of CUs, is your emotional connection. And now we move in to what I would say is more the logical connection, right? And as humans, we we use both sides of our brain, right? We look at the world logically. There's cars coming. I can't cross the street. I don't really have an emotional feeling about that. I just logically, I'm looking at my surroundings and taking them in and making sure that I'm okay. And then maybe we see our friend crossing the sidewalk and now there's an emotional connection. I look you in the eyes. And that's kind of what we're doing on screen, right? So these logical connection shots, we could call them the basic storytelling. I've used that term. And they're really the fundamental shots, and they're the shots we get in today. So they're the medium long, and long shots, okay? And we'll go through that. And I think hopefully you guys, everyone still has a few things to shoot. I'd love to see you play with this week's content in the field during this video, which is one reason why we've been sliding it back, because I wanted to get to this point so that you could play. So hopefully, even if you've shot some of your stuff, maybe there's something you can reshoot with some new ideas, or maybe you can just shoot some surrounding cutaways, but try and use some of these ideas. And the idea is to have a variety of both logical and emotional shots so that you can tell your story and then up the emotional ante when it's appropriate. So these 6 shots are the important ones out of this book. The others are more artsy, more high-end, but these are the ones that you use over and over and over again. You use your logical shots to establish basic storytelling, letting people figure out what's actually going on in your show. And then you use the heightened emotional connection shots at the key moments to make it mean something, to make it feel something. And then, you know, the extreme long shot and the subjective shot and all of those also are sort of emotional connection. You know, you don't necessarily use them for basic storytelling as much as to suggest something about your story, right? To create a moment. So the idea of connecting with your audience is one way that we look at this term. And the other one, and this is particularly true today, he talks about connecting characters. Characters and settings. What I'm after is for you guys to be in the field and setting a shot or on a storyboard and going, all right, I've got 2 people in the shot and the quad behind them. And the way it's framed, this is a medium long shot. I know that now, it's part of my vocabulary. And I'm using it to establish this scene and the relationship between the characters and their setting. So you now have purpose. You're not just pointing and shooting because it looks right. You are actually thinking about what the crafting of your image, of each image that you shoot, means to your audience, or can mean. So the longer shots are often about showing relationships between a pair of characters, who's in power, or are they equal? Is one smaller, one bigger? What's their body language? Are they aggressive? Are they, you know, romantic? But also connecting your characters to their settings, what's going on around them. So you could shoot a sequence of me crossing the street, you know, close, medium shot of me, you don't see much, and then you cut to a medium shot of me, you know, of my view of a car coming. But you can also have a long shot of me walking up to the edge of the sidewalk with the traffic coming this way, and then cut into those tighter shots. So the longer shots can tell the whole story in an image. If you think about, I'm connecting my character and the setting all in one image. It doesn't always have to be a tightly edited sequence. Sometimes it can be one long shot that tells the whole story, okay? So we're connecting to our audience, and with these shots, you know, I guess with the tighter shots, we're connecting our audience to a single character, to a moment in their lives, to their emotion. And then we're broadening with these wider shots to connect our audience to information about what's going on in the story and how the pieces fit together. Okay? So, does anyone have any questions or comments? This is really interesting. Before we go in, I'm just going to dive into the lecture. I mean, I think you guys have a good grasp now of the story you're working on and the tools we use to start planning our shooting. So we're in the, you know, hopefully you have some things still to shoot so that you can play with these ideas and get some practical use. But just before I begin, because I'll launch in now to you know, another deck of 20 slides or so with some good information. Thoughts, comments, queries at this point? It's all making sense? Getting excited to go out and use these techniques and see what kind of effect you create? Okay. So page, after the MCU, you remember the MCU, shoulders up. Primarily the main focus of the MCU is that facial expression, but we have a little bit more room around it to introduce some background and some body language, or in this case, the mass that's getting wasted by this powerful front character. So that's that medium close-up, and then we get into the medium shot, and to me the break point is, you know, this is where we transition into less of an emotional shot and more of just basic storytelling. Right? These are the bread and butter, building blocks shots. You know, the first things you should think about shooting are your medium, long shots, your storytelling, and then figure out how you're going to go in at what points you need to be in on the subject to get a close up for that emotional impact, right? So he opens with this shot of Gwyneth Paltrow in the Royal Tannenbaums. And have you guys heard of Wes Anderson? Wes Anderson films? He's this quirky director who kind of made a big splash, and his style is very cartoonish. Bright colors, odd settings or odd objects, and busy frames. You know, and she's heavily made up here, and the pink telephone, and you know, these darkroom supplies. His whole movie looks and feels that way. So it's a stylistic thing that he's doing. And he's using medium shots heavily in this and other movies because he's not only focused on characters and their emotions, he's always playing with this weird setting. So he's using medium shots and wide shots to always have that quirky Wes Anderson look, where there's these random, colorful backgrounds and things going on in his movies. We can take a look at some Wes Anderson stuff, but just to explain this shot, Wes Anderson is known for elaborate imaginative art direction, costume design, oddball characters. Unsurprisingly, medium shots that showcase them predominantly or prominently are used extensively in many of his films. In this shot from the Royal Tannenbaums, Margot, an adopted member of the family, hides from her husband to smoke a cigarette. The wide area covered by the shot, coupled with carefully chosen lighting, depth of field, wardrobe, body language, and central placement of the character allows the audience to make connections between her and the various items around her. Paraphernalia, dark room, pink telephone. Convey a lot of specific information about her character in a single image. One of the things he points out is that when you use a wider shot with a lot going on, you can use it longer on the screen. So as you're editing, but even as you're shooting, you can think about, oh, my wide shots, my long shots can be up here a little longer, especially if I frame them carefully so that there's a lot that I want people to take in. So The mechanics or the uses of the medium shot, typically we're showing one or more characters, and the defining element is this waist up framing. Okay, again, with her head, this is how powerful the rule of thirds are. Because, you know, her mouth, where this phone area is on that third line, her headroom's proper even as we cut her at the waist. So again, the face is always that focal point, or most of the time, especially in a single shot, that's the first thing people do is they look at someone's face, they look in the eyes. So, you know, you're using a third line to do that. So typically one or more characters from the waist up, and then be thinking also about your background, surrounding area. Try and make it meaningful if you can. It lets you showcase body language, so not just facial expression, but you know what their body tension is. And then we get into this descending ability to see the face. But he doesn't say that the face doesn't become meaningless until we get to a long shot. Okay, so the close-up, the medium close-up, the medium shot, and the medium long shot all to some degree include this ability to use the face to project meaning and emotion. So you get to see, you know, we're kind of in the middle here. We get to see facial expression well enough, but also this connection to the background. And so that it can convey the dynamics of relationship of, say, two characters, or maybe three. After you get three, it's kind of hard to be waist up and still get everyone in the frame. But, you know, you can make some look bigger than others, or you can have them kind of equal, but you can create relationships on screen that kind of tell the story of what's happening in those characters. So if I have two characters in my shot, and there's a dynamic between them, one's angry at the other, you know, I probably don't want to compose it equally. I want to compose it maybe looking up at the threatening person a little bit, and trying to make the person who's in that frame being yelled at look a little smaller. Just subtle compositional technique. But that's that idea of dynamics of the relationship through the character. And then I would tell my actors, since I can see your body language, I want you, while you're yelling, I want your arm tensed up. I want to see that anger expressed in your body language. So it can be used in two shots, small groups. Needs to stay on screen longer because there's more in it. And then this gets really interesting. He starts talking about how to mix these shots together. Okay, so, and you know, this is a book you want to be reviewing, especially before you go out in the field. Before you shoot, maybe read a couple of these sections where he talks about it's useful as a transition between the wider and the tighter shots. Common use, medium shots through the conversation until there's a key moment, and then go to a close-up. So medium, you know, start with a wide shot, medium, 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 medium. The conversation gets heated. Now you drop in those close-ups. So, you know, it comes in between your establishing shot and that emotional impact. Everything in between can be your medium shots. And you're telling the story, the relationship between the characters and their surroundings and each other. So that's a nice little section in here, right here on the first couple paragraphs. Talks about allowing you to gradually increase the audience involvement. Okay, so think about going from a wide shot, establishing shot, right to a close-up. Well, you know, your audience is going to be like, wow, that's dramatic. And if you use it that way, which you certainly can, it should be for that, because that's how people are going to experience it. If you want to gradually get to that moment of peak emotion, you use these shots as transition because they're less emotional, right? They're more factual. So I thought that was an interesting, this concept of allowing you to gradually increase the audience involvement. So you can think about your progression of your composition towards sort of an emotional peak or a peak area of emotional involvement for your audience. And you're working your way to that through these various other shots to those payoff close-ups. And so then he talks about a common scenario using medium shots to cover a conversation between two or more people until a key moment occurs. At this point, a medium close-up or close-up is used, adding dramatic emphasis to the moment. Then, after this beat, the rest of the conversation returns to medium or wider shots. The added emphasis provided by the tighter framing of the close-up or medium close-up only works because wider expository shots like the medium shot are used to establish the facts of the scene, the locale, the character, the physical relationships, before a change in the dramatic direction of the scene is introduced. And then he talks about what it would be like to cut from a long shot to a tight shot. It says something different to your audience. It's going to be that scary moment, right, where you snap in on the face of the killer. So if you want to jar people, you make that big transition. But if you want, most of the time, you're going to want to have this idea of gradually controlling the emotional investment until you hit peak. Establish the facts, the scene, the locale, the character, the physical relationships. So then we get into our example. And this is a really cool image. And I'll just break down what the technique he's describing and use here. But this is from a movie called Naked from 1993. And the backstory is this guy is kind of a homeless, literate bum. So he's highly educated, highly intelligent, but he's also living on the streets like a ne'er-do-well. And part of his personality character is he hates other people. Okay. And so in this shot, they're saying they're capturing, his facial expression has that kind of disdain, but he's also above the milieu. The passersby on the street are framed a little bit below him, so it's sort of capturing his sense of, I'm a disdainful but superior person. And then, this gets into set design and stuff, but his surroundings suggest this sort of urban street life that has become his home. So there's a lot going on in this. And so they talk about the relatively wide field of view is ideal for establishing visual relationships between characters and characters in their surroundings. So we've got both going on here, but primarily between characters, strangers, and our main guy in a relationship, a visual relationship that reflects the story. A well-read but misanthropic homeless man living his life on a self-destructive path, extracting joy out of ranting at strangers as he aimlessly wanders the streets of London. The simple composition of this medium shot perfectly encapsulates how Johnny sees himself and the reality of his situation, placing him slightly above the passersby who go about their business with purpose, while he, with nowhere to go, watches them snidely. This shot is also an example of an emblematic shot, since it conveys many of the core ideas explored in the film in a single image. If you remember, we talked about trying to make sure you guys have a definition as you look at your story. What are some core ideas? This is guys kind of dropping out of society would be a core idea. And so they've crafted a shot that visualizes that core idea. This guy, aloof, he's among people, but he's aloof. So we'll get to the emblematic shot, but that's another. I'm hoping at some point when you're out in the field, these things will come back to you and you'll be like, oh, I have an opportunity to grab it because it's emblematic. Basically telling the story in the shot. So in this part of the book, he just points out specific things to pay attention to technically. And here, the character is a few inches lower than the character at the focal point of the composition. Lets the audience know, notice his facial expressions. He's the focal point. You notice he's on the third, or very close to it, because that's where they want us paying attention. And the medium, although the medium shot typically showcases body language surrounding, it's still possible to convey emotions and nuanced behavior through the face of the character. Shallow depth of field in the foreground of the image lets the audience concentrate on the main subject. So if he's in focus, they're a little soft. That also helps us draw attention to him. Placement of the character follows rule of thirds, giving him the proper amount of headroom for this frame and aspect ratio. And it's also they've designed this shot to isolate him in this area of the frame, making sure nothing else around him can distract the audience from noticing his reactions. So they're kind of controlling the background. Compression along the z-axis. Pedestrian traffic from both sides adds multiple layers of the depth to the composition while suggesting space extends beyond the edges of the frame. Movement provides a sharp contrast against the stillness of the character. So that's interesting too, right? The fact that these people are busily moving offsets the fact that he's not. And then depth, right? They're foreground, and because they're softer, we get that sense of some depth and some movement. So
their clothing's all lighter, so like the gray and white hoodie makes it see, like, you can see him more, even though he's wearing all black, just because of that contrast.
And the black, the fact that everything's black makes his face stand out. Remember, the brighter areas draw our attention, so that's probably purposeful too. But it's subtle, right? I mean, it also works. I mean, that's how a guy on the streets in this, lifestyle probably would dress, so we buy it. But cinematically, it also serves that purpose. And yes, there's a pretty blonde woman, and then neutral expressions, and as they say, these people are going through their business with purpose. Contrast his not. So this gets more than you're going to be able to do. But if you're thinking along these lines, there are going to be shots that you guys can get that play with these concepts. And the goal is that you will be able to, when we screen the films, you'll be able to describe at the key moments where you've been able to apply something that we've discussed. That's really what I'm looking for, is just not to be that sophisticated, yet, but to find your opportunities to elevate your game compositionally and storytelling wise. So then breaking the rule shot, and this is really interesting. So why is this a medium shot? That's how we define it, the waist up. But they crop her head. The story here is this woman is like a housewife, and when the kids are at school, she's a prostitute. And she's receiving a customer at the door in the middle of the day, and this sort of anonymity, right? So we've got this very domestic look, but also the fact that she's kind of got this secret life. And so in this case, the man's coming to the door and they're keeping it very anonymous visually, as if she's checking out of her normal life to greet this guy that we probably don't see a whole lot of either. And the anonymity of sex for hire is part of the theme here. So kind of a cool take and really a very cool shot. All right, so as we expand outward, medium shots, medium long shots. I would say if you only use 3 shots, you could do a whole narrative with the medium long, the medium, and the medium close-up. So you have one on the logical side, one on the side, and one transition. So the medium long shot, basically it's interesting how the medium or the medium close-up is shoulders down, medium is waist down, medium long is knees down. So you can use the increments of people's bodies when you frame to know where to put the bottom of the frame. And when you use the knees, you've got the medium long shot. So this is where we start to get into that idea of connecting characters. Okay, the medium long shot includes characters from the knees up in the frame, and it's often used with multiple characters to show their relationship. And in this case, this guy and this girl, he saved her from like corrupt police, but then she misbehaved and he kind of banished her, and now they're reconnecting. He's kind of looking at her and deciding whether he'll help her some more. So you can see a lot of that just in that body language, right? Like his body language is kind of saying, I'm not real happy with you, but it's softened up and you can see, I mean, she's almost just eagerly in front of him. And then they also, this is that use of background. This is sophisticated for something you guys can start to do. They've isolated these two in this open space. Just like in the prior shot, we saw the guy up against the wall, but his face was kind of not, you know, it was framed well by things around him to make it visible. That's also going on here. So, a funny little anecdote, this shot from the knees up, the Europeans started calling it the American shot, because in the days of the Westerns, they wanted guys to see the holsters and the guns, and so they started shooting from the knees down, you know, breaking the conventions of the time during, you know, dialogue scenes, because they wanted the guns to be visible. So they're American shots, extensively in the U.S. used in the Westerns to show the guns. So often group shots, two shots, emblematic shots, again capturing the whole story in one, or the whole core idea in one image. And they have enough room to show multiple characters and key surroundings simultaneously, all at once. That's the key difference here. So you have characters and key surroundings all in one shot. So good for establishing relationships of body language. Still some faces, the last shot where the facial expressions are considered visible enough to be meaningful. If the facial expression is the most important thing in the shot, then you're using the wrong shot, right? But you can still, you know, the relationship between characters is important, but the fact that you can still see him scowling versus smiling is helpful. Body language, facial expressions, surroundings simultaneously. And these are three key visual elements in storytelling. So that's a way to look at this shot. How do I use it? When do I use it? What do I use it for? Well, body language, facial expressions, and the surroundings of the relationship in the group, those are all three key elements for people to understand a story, and you can give them that at key moments with this shot. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on this particular one. While the long shot, which is coming next, emphasizes the body language in the surrounding area, the size of the medium long shot allows you to showcase body language, some facial expression, and the surrounding area simultaneously, making them ideal for situations when a relationship between these three visual elements needs to be established to present a narrative point. It's also ideal to establish dynamics of a relationship between characters by the way they are placed in the composition. Okay, and the two things that he breaks out in that idea are Hitchcock's rule. So the biggest person in the frame would be the most important at that time in the story, or balanced and unbalanced, right? If they're equal, and we'll see, I'll just skip ahead here real quick and show you an example of an equally balanced shot, even though this is a long shot. You guys seen The Matrix?
Yeah.
So in this case, they're getting ready to start a fight, kind of like a shot we saw before, and they're balanced because they're equal. So you can use Hitchcock's rule or balanced versus unbalanced as a way of narratively communicating relationships just by the size of people in your frame. And you say the medium long shot is kind of ideal for that. So Hitchcock's rules, balance or balance. Medium long shots commonly used in combination with tighter shots to control the emotional involvement. So similar to the medium of the audience, normally cutting to medium close-ups or close-ups of key moments of the scene. Because they can also pick up facial expression, medium long shots can be used by themselves without completely sacrificing the emotional connection associated with tighter shots. The relatively wide coverage of medium long shots makes it necessary to keep them on the screen slightly longer than tighter shots with fewer elements. So then in this shot, from Luc Besson-Lyon's The Professional from 1994, small exchange between the title character, Jean Reno, an expert hitman, and Matilda. It's actually Natalie Portman, who's a 12-year-old who saved from a gang of cops. So he's a hitman, but he saved this little girl from corrupt cops. In the previous scene, Matilda proved her intent to become a killer by blindly shooting a gun out of his apartment's window, prompting him to move out. Medium long shot that follows is used as a reveal. Leon appears first in the frame as he walks towards us, tricking the audience into thinking he has ditched Matilda. But as the shot continues, Matilda enters the frame, revealing that he has in fact decided to let her tag along. The scene plays out entirely in this shot as they have a brief exchange, relying on the ability of the medium long shot to show some facial expression and much body language. Central placement of the characters in the frame, combined with the exclusion of most of the background and the use of shallow depth of field, isolates them from their surroundings, underlying the awkwardness of their pairing by letting the audience concentrate on their dramatically contrasting costumes and physical appearance, right? So this is an odd couple story, right? The hitman taking care of the little girl. So a lot going on. It's amazing how much is going on visually. And I guess one of the things that I find fascinating about this for you guys is, we tend to shoot like, I just need this shot, does it work? Does it help tell my story? But visually, there's so much going on. Even if you haven't planned it out, there's still all this information, what your characters are wearing, the dynamic between them, that you now are going to start to be thinking about more thoroughly. And I think that's exciting. Definitely makes it more fun to shoot. So this is a shot from 1984. Did you guys have to read that in high school? Anyone read 1984 by George Orwell? Yeah, okay, so dating myself, that was a staple back in the day. So 1984, famous novel, George Orwell, and it's about a society where the government has basically taken over and everyone lives under the watchful eye of Big Brother, who is the representative of the government or the entity. So here's a poster of Big Brother looking down on this guy. And so this guy's in trouble. He's created a diary, which people aren't allowed to do anymore. And so let me just, I'll give you the backstory and then we'll look at it. This shot is designed to let the audience see Winston Smith, played by John Hurt, a party worker at the Ministry of Truth after he was tortured and brainwashed for committing a thought crime of keeping a diary. He is flanked by a poster with the figurehead of the state, Big Brother, on the left, and a television screen that's playing his confession as a traitor to the party. So that's him in that inset confessing to his crime. So it's a take on communism gone wrong, bureaucracy gone wrong. A long shot would not have allowed us to see the listless expression on his face, while a medium shot would have excluded either the poster or the confession. Both necessary visual elements to communicate the narrative point of the shot. Note the use of extra headroom over the character, visually emphasizing his defeat by the totalitarian regime that watches over his every move, symbolized by the gaze of Big Brother behind him. So I think that that's interesting. They're saying if we use just the medium shot, yeah, we could see his downtrodden face, but we wouldn't have room for these other narrative elements, right? His confession, the Big Brother watching everything. And a long shot, we wouldn't have been able to see his face as well. So they've kind of honed in on these three storytelling elements that they want in here. And he says, this shot, ideal to showcase characters' body language, some face, and the surrounding area. So the poster shows the gaze, Excessive amount of headroom for a shot this size, but within the context of the scene, it shows the character's defeat. So basically, this extra headroom is meant to kind of put him lower in the frame because he's struggling. And they're also shooting down on him a little bit, as you can probably see. Inclusion of the telescreen in the background. Essential to the narrative point made by the shot, the character confessed to crimes he did not commit while he sits reactionless in the foreground, confirms that other confessions shown throughout the film are also untrue, staged by the state. Camera subject distance, focal length, depth of view, carefully chosen, make sure all elements necessary are included in the composition. And then we get into a concept repertoire. That's a word we get out of this book. This is one of those things, if you stay in the arts, stay in, in creative production, terms like this are really cool to understand, and it shows, you paid attention to the details. Repertoire. I don't know if you guys can see that at home, but it's in the book, and the term comes up a couple times. Any idea what language that's from? Huh?
French.
It's French! You silly English kniggets. So repertoire, so it's a French term, right? So it sounds fancy. And what it means is it's this chair in the foreground that's only there for depth. So using repertoire means it's when you find that back of the chair to frame your subject and give it depth. Okay, so try to remember that. Just because if you can hold on to that, a lot of other things remain in your grasp. There's this concept in business, if you take care of the little things, the big things take care of themselves. That's the idea. If you are focused on the details, you are automatically, the big things come together. Understanding a term like repertoire, what it is, why you want to use it, just remembering that it means something cinematically. You hold on to those things and allow these other things, it frames your mind to make these other things more accessible. Okay? So then we break the rules. Between characters, often used in combination with the emotion shots, so medium, medium, long, but can be shown enough face to carry emotional narrative too. Keep on screen longer, since there's more to absorb. And especially you can think about beginning your scenes with these kind of shots, because they tell the whole story. Then you can go in for the details. You can kind of craft your sets or stage your characters to give yourself kind of that full narrative view. So breaking the rules, it's hard to see, but there's a character back here, out of focus, and again, lots of headroom because she's scared. And basically this shot is, she's about to be attacked by a serial killer. And she's run into the woods and she's hiding. And the idea is that at this moment, it makes the woods kind of look like a sanctuary. And they're focusing on the woods. And so she's blurred out in the background, but it's still her presence. It's still her. I can just read this. Generally used to showcase character and some of the surrounding. In this example, from Memories of Murder, 2003, based on a true story of South Korea's first serial murders A character who appears she's being stalked is purposely kept out of focus throughout the length of the shot, diverting the audience's attention to the deserted woods around her instead. Unusual and highly effective technique shifts the focus figuratively and literally away from the human subject to the deceptively harmless woods, moments before the character is violently attacked. Note that although the character is completely blurred, she is placed in the composition according to the rule of thirds, ensuring a dynamic frame and proper amount of headroom for a medium long shot. So, interesting stuff. Rule of thirds, very powerful. Break it knowingly. If you're working off the rule of thirds, it's because you're going for tension and unbalanced shots. Okay. Long shot. This is the last one for today. Appreciate your guys' attention to this. Review the book, and then I want you to use these things, as you're shooting those. Think about anything you can retain from this. The more you dive into the material, the more you'll be able to pull out of your hat at the time when you're framing. So the long shot, this is Sid Vicious. Anyone know who Sid Vicious was? I feel like it's Jeopardy. Sid Vicious was a bass player in the late 70s, early 80s punk band, the Sex Pistols. Johnny Rotten and the Sex Pistols. So we had, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, all the stuff that your parents listened to. And then the next iteration of English rock was this gritty punk music that came out and just dun, 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 dun. It was almost heavy metal. So Sid Vicious falls in and starts playing bass with the Sex Pistols. He's like 22 years old, becomes an international superstar, has a massive heroin addiction, and dies at 26. So kind of a horror story, but this is a movie called Sid and Nancy. 1986 makes a powerful statement about the unorthodox relationship that existed between punk rocker Sid Vicious and his girlfriend Nancy Spungen. And what's interesting, this is a true story, what's interesting about Nancy is she's like from a really wealthy family in suburban New York, so her parents are appalled that she's now the girlfriend of this internationally renowned, and these guys would like spit on their audience, and the punk scene, and they were the Sex Pistols were the originators and kind of the quintessential punk band where it's just gross and nasty. So the long shot includes characters in their entirety. So we're moving down the body. Knees, medium, long. Now we get the feet. This is cropped a little bit because I didn't want anything distracting from the image, but basically the difference between the medium long and the long shot is you get down and show their feet where they're standing. And again, every time you open up more of the body while maintaining headroom, you're obviously opening up more space around it. So the surroundings become more a part of the composition. So it shows their feet along with lots of surrounding area. It's too far to see facial expressions. So this is the first shot where he says the facial expressions are lost. So it concentrates on the body and what it reveals, commonly used at the beginning of scenes to establish location, show viewers where something will take place, and it can also be used at the end to show a different dramatic tone from the scene's beginning. If you remember our early week, the narrative arc, equilibrium, conflict, resolution, new equilibrium. It's that idea of, and so he's saying over the course of a scene, something transpires in the scene where you open in one state, and after the action of the scene, you can use this long shot as a bookend that shows how things have changed. It's all really cool stuff. So compositions, like medium shots, emphasize a character. And this is interesting, he talks both ways. You can frame it to emphasize the character over the surrounding space, where the surrounding space is secondary, even though it's included. Or you can flip it and use this kind of shot to emphasize the space and make the character look kind of small or overwhelmed. Think about that shot of The girl sitting in the chairs, Anna Kendrick. That would be a one where, I mean, she's there hunched over, but it's the space, it's those chairs crowding her that kind of are the emphasis in that shot, as well as her, emotional defeat. Or to establish a special connection between a character and a space. Good for emblematic shots that convey complex associative ideas or the arrangement of visual elements. So this is tricky here because you can use it as an establishing shot, but then the next level of thinking as you're shooting, as you're framing is, am I emphasizing the characters and the surroundings are secondary? Or am I emphasizing the surrounding and making the characters secondary? Or am I kind of doing both? Am I playing both sides of that fence equally to make a connection between those two? I know there's a lot to think about. This isn't something I expect you to be able to get exposed to just one time and go out and execute. Right? This is something you need multiple exposures to for this stuff to sink in. And then obviously chances to work on it. But just conceptually read it, follow the lecture, but go back and refer to it again. So that because just every time I read it, I get more out of this. So, continue on here with some of the uses. Works well for group shots and display power dynamics between characters. Normally on screen longer because there's more to see. And it's used to build emotion. Again, this idea of pacing the emotional impact. So he's saying, this set, a longer shot, and even though you can have an emotional component to it like that, the real emotion comes in closer. So you're using this shot as a table setter. You know that payoff's coming, but you don't want to get, you don't want to get to it right away. You want to build up to it, and so it's used to build toward that emotion. Scenes covered with long and medium shots until something important takes place, and then you switch to MCUs and CUs. And it can also be used to limit emotional involvement if you want to keep people at a distance from things for whatever reason, psychological manipulation of the narrative. You stay in these longer shots, or we don't, and you use it to like frustrate your audience, right? Like you can see a fight going on, but you can't see who's involved. You can just see that it's a fight, right? And the longer you keep them out of that, the more that natural impulse of, I want to see, take me inside this fight. I want to see who's fighting, so as you read this, he talks about how, filmmakers do that. There's times when they, in fact, this final long shot has that kind of mystery to it. Okay, so a lot to think about there. Let's just go back to this and we'll get the description. So Alex Cox's biopic, Sid and Nancy, film that follows the mutually destructive relationship that existed between Sex Pistol bassist Sid Vicious and an American groupie, Nancy Spungen. Features long shots that consistently place them amidst the drugs, alcohol, violence, and filth that permeated their world. So they use a lot of this because they always want, in order to sort of capture the punk experience, there's always garbage and alcohol and drugs, and they're always in these settings. So the setting is important to this filmmaker, as well as the characters. So there's lots of long shots placing them in the film that permeated the world. In the example here, a mesmerizing long shot, also a perfect example of an emblematic shot, perfectly captures the alternate nature of their punk rock lifestyle and romance. They're shown semi-silhouetted in a filthy alley, kissing lovingly as garbage rains down in slow motion. Composition places them against a gap between buildings, which makes them stand out in the frame, emphasizing the contradiction between their actions, the love and kiss, and the setting. Not surprising, this arresting image was also used in one of the promotional posters for the film. So again, you see this technique of using a bright or isolating area of the background to showcase your characters, right? Background will compete with your main subject. So you want to find, you know, sometimes it's just moving until that gap between the buildings frames your people. Okay. So then we get this as his example that he breaks down. So in addition to conveying relationships between characters and their surrounding area, the long shot can be used to suggest narrative and thematic dynamics between characters through their placement and relative scale. Wide area covered by this shot makes compositional guidelines like Hitchcock's rule, balance on unbalanced frames, and the compression expansion along the z-axis particularly helpful in establishing these relationships. So he's saying this particular shot, the long shot, gives you more room to play with things like Hitchcock's rule of balance and unbalance. So in this long shot from the Matrix Reloaded, a pending fight between Neo and Agent Smith is suggested by their placement is a duel between equally matched opponents, increasing the tension and dramatic impact of the scene. So we don't know who's got the upper hand here, and that, you know, that so your audience then is experiencing at this point in the movie, like, I don't know which way this is going to go, and there's no clue, right? They're hiding the outcome from me by starting this in a neutral shot. Lighting manipulated so that both characters have a backlight that separates them from the background, helps them stand out in the composition. Very common practice designed to guide the viewer's gaze toward the most important area of the frame, the character. So this is what they're calling the backlight. And remember, just from lighting technique, anytime you can get light on the top of someone's head and their shoulders, even if it's just positioning someone, or the sun, instead of having the sun hit them in the front, turn them around, have the sun highlight them from the back, it has the effect of pulling the character out of the background. It separates from the background. So it's a really good, it gives that three-dimensionality. And that's why when they talk about three-point lighting, key light, fill light, the third light is always that backlight. And with today's cameras, you can usually get a good enough look at someone's face or their clothing or whatever, even if they're turned away from the sun. So the one light you might want to try and manufacture, whether it's the sun or an overhead, would be a backlight, because the camera's going to do okay with the rest. And I'll give you a little lighting tutorial before we go into the next video. Amount of headroom here is correct for a shot this size. Increasingly tighter framings have increasingly smaller amounts of headroom. It can also be exaggerated or removed altogether to make a narrative point about a character, so remember that. But typically, rule of thirds. Characters are not placed in the frame according to rule of thirds. Instead, they were placed unusually close to the edges, emphasizing the empty space between them while almost completely removing space behind them. This placement in the composition implies they can only move towards each other, foreshadowing their imminent fight. So that's an interesting departure from rule of thirds, right? This idea that there's only room visually for them to come at each other. Appropriate for the start of a fight scene. Framing shows both characters taking up the same amount of room, suggesting they're evenly matched. Typical implementation of Hitchcock's rule, their placement also creates a balanced composition, further emphasizing equal power and increasing tension and suspense in the scenes we talked about. So he's saying a typical implementation of Hitchcock's rule, the two biggest things in the frame are equally important because they're equal size. Remember Hitchcock's rule. The biggest thing in the frame should be the most important thing in the story at that moment. Kind of a cool concept that you can play with. Backgrounds darker, highlighting them 2 layers of depth. Foreground where the characters are placed in the background, lack of a third layer creates a somewhat flat composition, visually restricting character movement to the x-axis toward each other in conflict. So you see, it's pretty sophisticated when you break these things all the way down. Power dynamics between characters, on screen longer, used to build emotion, can limit emotional involvement, and then we have the example from Sid and Nancy. So this, we touched on this, I'll just give you the backstory here. This is our breaking the rules. So this is from a movie called Hidden, 2005. Follows the story of Georges, a TV personality who suddenly gets stalked and harassed by someone he assumes is tied to a transgression he committed as a child. So he's stalked by someone looking for revenge. In this long shot, which is the final image from the film, we see his son, Pierre, chatting with the son of the man who might have been behind the harassment. This cluttered scene makes it hard to notice them at first and later difficult to see the exact nature of their relationship, preventing the audience from unraveling the mystery and getting narrative closure, a recurrent technique used throughout the film. So we think about giving our viewers information and emotional connection, and you can also prevent your viewer from getting key information. You can tease their curiosity. And so this is interesting. This is not, I think it's these two. And this is the final shot of the film. So whatever's happened between the dads has played out, and the film ends with the two sons meeting and talking. But we don't really know where that goes. They leave it on that mysterious note. So that would be the idea of limiting their emotional ability to connect. Okay? So, to me, this is the core of the course. These 5 shots, close-up, medium, long, long. The rest of them are nice, but these are your working toolkit. And when you shoot, when you storyboard, when you shoot script, I want you to be thinking about these are going to be the bulk of your show. And you can cover everything from an emblematic, logical, establishing shot to the height of emotion just in the range of these 5 shots and the visual rhythm that you do. The big thing is stay neutral until you need that emotional close-up. And he describes that a couple times. You know, you go back and forth, medium, long, medium, long, until something big happens. You start moving. So it's a simple concept, but I think using it effectively is a lifetime art that you guys can work to. And I think it's one of the real beauties of this course is now shooting video and shooting sequences is no longer just a random, well, how are these shots going to fit together? It's, wow, I know what the purpose of each shot in my sequence could be, how I can extract meaning and impact by understanding not, a language of how to describe the shot, why it's a medium long versus a long versus a close-up, how to shoot it so that people recognize it, and then all these underlying theories and uses that he describes. So, questions, thoughts? Does it make you rethink your approach to this first script?
Yeah.
I would hope so. I would hope it would make, and that's why I'm hoping you guys still have some things to shoot. Or what I would say is even if you've shot everything, and I know it's a pain to bring actors back together and go back on location with the gear, but maybe take your phone or a camera and shoot a wide shot, a long shot that would help establish your story. Maybe it's the time of day, so you get a long shot, of the setting under the time of day that the story's going to take place, or how the story ends with a sunset or something. But and if you do still have things to shoot with your people, at the very least understand where these increments are and kind of the purpose of, and what you really want is obviously a mix of all of these shots, and then in post you figure out how to put it together. But a lot of times what people will do with one camera is they'll shoot a scene all on the medium long shot, and then they'll shoot it all on a medium shot, and then they'll shoot it all with isolated close-ups of each character. And that way you can go back and forth visually between those camera compositions however you want to in post. Now, it demands more from your actors, right? They have to do the scene 4 times. If it's a 2-person scene and you do it in 4 different shots. But it is that is a technique. It's a safe way to to have maximum flexibility. I would say at least what you want to do is shoot 2 compositions of each, even if you don't shoot the whole scene. If you're shooting, like I'm going to start this scene on a medium long shot, also shoot it on a medium shot. So just so you have visual variety, and maybe you'll even cut in post if you feel like the pace is too slow. If you shoot it at a long shot, maybe you do add a medium long, but get 2 looks at everything. And trust me, when you start posting, you'll see that extra footage comes in really handy. Guys online, hopefully that was fascinating to you all. Everyone good?
Yes, thank you.
Antonio, how are you feeling?
Yeah, a little bit better, man. I think the fever finally went down as I was able to actually sleep this morning and actually missed my alarm clock today.
Well, good. Did you get a test yet?
Yeah, I was tested on Monday afternoon and we're just waiting on the results.
Okay. Well, we certainly wish you the best, and keep me updated. I hope I'm not sharing out of school by letting people know that maybe you're not feeling well and we don't know what the cause is, but.
Nah, you're good, man. You're good. I also was a little bit late to class today and I sent a message on Zoom, but I wasn't sure if you saw it.
Okay, I see we had Isabel Alba here for a little bit, and you, Antonio, so I'll mark you guys as here. Again, fun part of the book, if you only master 5 concepts, it's these 5 shots. Get to know these and the rest we'll play with, but this will elevate your ability to tell stories visually. And I hope we can just put our foot to the gas and use them on this video and then really crank it up in the second one. Okay? All right, guys. So I'll assign some more reading if it's not already on Moodle. I'll review for next week. But basically, the real goal here is I'd like everyone to be done shooting by Tuesday. And bring the footage in. If you can come to class or boot up your computer on Zoom, what I'd like to do is I will edit footage and walk through how we run Premiere and manage media and offline on Tuesday, and then show you all the online elements that I want you to be working on, color correction, audio filters, just basic stuff that will also really elevate your final product on Thursday. And then you'll use those tools over the weekend to edit your first video, and we'll start looking at them the following Tuesday. So next week, you finish shooting over the weekend, we edit together next week, you finish, and then we screen the week following. That should all be on Moodle now. So hopefully that's clear. Okay, have fun. Make me feel something. All right, buddy, have a good weekend.
Yeah.
So I still have that one camera. I can bring it in tomorrow to return it, but could I check out a different one, either